So why does your body spend so much time trying to make ATP all day, every day, right? So here again, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We've got our adenosine. So we have adenine plus a sugar. That's called adenosine. And then triphosphate, the three phosphates. You got it? Well, but why? Why does your body want this? Well, for instance, in order to make bonds happen. So in order for bonds to come together, um, for all kind of molecules to interact with each other, well, we need ATP for that. Or let's say if we need to make more DNA, or if we need to make more cells, we need to replicate cells to make more of whatever cell type. Now, I want to draw your attention to something. This part here where it says rapid cell turnover. What am I talking about here? You ready? Hold on. I'm getting all excited over here. You getting excited too? I know. So, your body is constantly turning over cells. Now, you have different cells that turn over faster than others. Those are called labile cells. They're rapidly dividing. There are periods in life, though, where the cells are turning over even faster. So, for instance, these 4 periods of rapid cell turnover, where you have a lot of labile cells, number 1 is pregnancy. Think about it. Okay, you have a whole embryo, a whole fetus that's growing inside the mom. We got to have energy for that. There again, we need some ATP to make all those cells because we got to make a whole baby. Okay, another period is from 0 to 2 years old. Okay, so very early in life. You know how fast kids are growing. Need a lot of ATP for that. Another period is from 4 to 7. So around that time when they're starting to go to school and you know how much they eat, there again, a lot of energy requirement. And then another time is puberty. Now, for those of you who have teenagers, you know what it's like. They eat up the whole house, right? I just had a flashback. I remember this is funny. I remember my son's gonna kill me. So I remember one time, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. I hear all this commotion in the kitchen, right? So my son has gone into the kitchen. He's got the refrigerator open. So I come around the counter and all I see, I don't even see his face. I just see a butt out. Like I see him in the refrigerator with his butt sticking out. So it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. He's in there. He's a teenager at this time. Or I don't know, he's probably younger than that, probably like 8, 9 years old, something like that. But he's in there. I don't know what he was getting, but he's eating something at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, wow. I mean, hungry much? or greedy much? Anyway, there are lots of times in your body, or lots of periods in life, rather, where there's a lot of cell turnover. So, why do I want to show you this, though? Notice this. See how we can apply so much? Remember how I said that from 0 to 2 years old and 4 to 7 years old, these are 2 periods where there's rapid cell turnover, right? And kids need a whole lot of energy. They have so much energy demand on their body. Well, would you know that, for instance, so the government found out, they were doing studies and they found out that, for instance, obviously kids need a lot of they experience a lot of growth during this time and they need proper nutrition. So this is why the government in most states now this is where WIC comes from, the program for women, infants, and children that allows the mom, for instance, to get certain amount of groceries, let's say if they're low income or even perhaps if not, but especially while the kid is growing, the government has decided that it's really important for this kid to have proper nutrition, especially during that time period. But this is where it comes from. The data just comes from the physiology of the cell. Okay? This is also why, so notice here. Notice from 0 basically to puberty, this whole time period, so much energy is required. Now, here's another way to apply this though. Let's say you have a child who's not getting proper nutrition at home. For instance, let's say in very low income neighborhoods, a child who's not receiving proper nutrition at home sometimes has to go to school, and that's the kid's only meal for the day. Can you imagine how difficult it is for optimal learning to take place if you don't have proper nutrition? So, there have been so many times throughout history where a child was labeled, for instance, developmentally delayed or cognitively impaired or slow, but there was nothing actually wrong. There was nothing really wrong mentally with the child. It was just the child didn't have proper nutrition. So if you're an educator, for instance, before you just kind of label somebody as, oh, this kid's slow or whatever, evaluate what's going on in their home life. It actually could be that they simply don't have proper nutrition to keep all these cells energized. Of course, that's going to affect their performance. So, for instance, you will find that in many cases, once the child is starting to receive a balanced meal and at least enough calories to sustain them throughout the day, suddenly test scores go up. Their overall performance starts to improve just by correcting the nutrition. Okay? So, we're talking about ATP, and I said that we need ATP to make bonds. We need ATP during these periods of, we need a lot of ATP to make all these cells during these periods of rapid cell turnover. We also need ATP for anything to move. In fact, for anything to move in the body, we need three things. We need calcium, we need ATP, and we need microtubules. Well, of course, that's ATP. All right. Another time we need ATP is, for instance, in the setting of active transport. Okay. So what we're saying is, let's say here's a cell. Well, let's say sodium is sitting on the outside of the cell, calcium is on the outside of the cell. Well, they naturally move in through a concentration gradient. So we have a higher concentration on the outside, and that kind of forces it in. No ATP is required for that part because it's moving with a concentration gradient. However, to go in reverse, to go from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell against the concentration gradient, we need energy for that. And that energy comes in the form of ATP. For instance, there are several what are called ATPases. These are just enzymes, so ATPases that are needed for different situations. So for instance, we have a calcium ATPase. This is what actually pumps calcium out of the cell. So for instance, calcium went into the cell for the muscle to contract. But we need ATP to come along to power up the ATPase to pump the calcium out so that the muscle can relax. So we need calcium to make the muscle contract, but we need ATP to make the muscle relax. How do we apply this? So for instance, let's say somebody dies and so they're resting in heaven. Well, you ever seen somebody, you go and somebody's been lying there deceased and they're kind of stiff and rigor mortis has set in, for instance? The reason rigor mortis has set in is now you had calcium that went into the cells that caused the muscles to contract. Well, the muscles are still in their contracted state, so their whole body is stiff. So you can literally take their big toe and move their big toe and their whole body moves. And all you touch was the toe. Well, that's because they're in this state of rigidity where all these muscles are stiff at once because they're deceased. They're no longer, their mitochondria are no longer able to generate ATP, right? Does that make sense? Another time is, for instance, through the hydrogen potassium ATPase. This is what acidifies the stomach acid so that you can digest your food. So what we're saying is you need ATP to digest your food. You need ATP for the muscles to relax. You also need ATP to power up the sodium potassium ATPase or the sodium potassium pump. And we're going to pick up the story from there for the rest of it, okay? So we need ATP to power up an ATPase, an enzyme. One big enzyme is the sodium potassium pump or sodium potassium ATPase. What is its job? So normally we said that the sodium goes into the cell, but to get it out of the cell, we have to have this ATPase here. Okay?